Have you ever just looked at the world and wondered why, no matter how hard we try, we seem to be stuck in this endless cycle of conflict? Well, today, we're going to unpack a theory that gives a pretty tough, sobering answer. It's called realism, and it's all about seeing the world not as we wish it was, but as it is, a raw, relentless struggle for power. So let's just dive right into the biggest question of all, right? Why is war always a part of human history? Why are countries constantly competing with each other? Now, if you ask a realist, the answer has nothing to do with good guys and bad guys. Nope. It's about the very system we're all living in. You see, the first rule of realism is that on the world stage, there really are no rules. And it's not about being cynical. It's about understanding the fundamental design of the whole international system. At the very heart of realism is this one single idea: anarchy. Now, that doesn't mean chaos in the streets with burning cars. In this context, anarchy just means there's no higher authority. There's no world government, no global police force, there's no 911 for a country to call when it's in trouble. Every nation is basically on its own. And that creates what realists call a self-help system. I mean, think about it for a second. If you knew for a fact that nobody was coming to save you, you'd be totally responsible for your own survival, right? Well, that one single stark reality is what drives pretty much every big decision a country makes. Okay, so if the world is basically a free-for-all, how do you even navigate that? How do you survive? Well, according to realists, you got to stick to a very specific playbook. And this playbook really boils down to four simple but incredibly powerful ideas. First, states, countries, are the main players on the board. Second, as we said, anarchy is the rule of the game. Third, every state is acting rationally to protect its own interests, and the number one interest is just plain survival. And finally, that means power, especially military power, is the only currency that really matters. Everything else, ideology, economics, you name it all comes a distant second. And look, this is not some new, radical idea. We're talking almost 2,500 years ago, the Greek historian Thucydides was writing about the war between Athens and Sparta, and he summed it up perfectly. His conclusion, basically, the game of power hasn't changed all that much. In fact, you can trace this line of thinking all the way through history. In the Renaissance, you had Machiavelli telling princes that survival justifies any means necessary. Then, in the 17th century, Thomas Hobbes described life without a government as a war of all against all. And this long, long tradition was finally formalized in the 20th century by thinkers like Hans Morgenthau and Kenneth Waltz, who really made realism the dominant way of thinking for their entire generation. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even realists don't agree on one huge point. What's the actual root cause of all this conflict? Is it just baked into who we are as humans, or is it something created by the international system itself? And this is the central debate. You've got two main flavors of realism. The classical realists, they point the finger at flawed human nature. They say we just have this endless desire for more power. But then you have the neo-realists, and they say, whoa, hold on. It's not about people, it's about the system. They argue that anarchy forces any state, it doesn't matter if it's a democracy or a dictatorship, to constantly go after more power, just to feel secure. So once you start looking at the world through this realist lens, it all starts to look like this giant high-stakes chess match. And it reveals some pretty fascinating and often really dangerous patterns in how countries behave. This leads us to one of the most tragic ideas in all of world politics, the security dilemma. It is the ultimate catch-22. It's when a country builds up its military just to feel safe, but its neighbor looks over, sees all those new weapons, feels threatened, and then starts a chain reaction that makes everyone less safe than they were at the start. And you can just see how this spirals out of control, can't you? State A feels a little insecure, so it builds up its military purely for defense. But State B can't know for sure what State A's intentions are, so it gets nervous and builds up its military. Well, now State A sees that and thinks, uh-oh, and the arms race is officially on. Every single step feels perfectly logical and defensive to the country taking it, but the end result is a world that's way more dangerous for everybody. So what do you do when a new, powerful threat pops up on the world stage? Well, according to realists, you really only have two main choices. You can either team up with others to stop it, or you can try to join the winning side. Realism predicts that strong countries will almost always choose to balance. They'll form alliances to counter that rising threat. I mean, think about the alliance between the capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union to stop Hitler. Talk about strange bedfellows. Bandwagoning, which is siding with the threat, that's a much, much riskier play.
It's usually what weaker states do when they're just trying to survive and hope for the best.
Okay, so this is a really powerful way to look at history for sure. But what about today? In our world of global trade and the internet and all these international groups, does this kind of old school theory still hold up?
Well, realism's main rival is another theory called liberalism, and they could not see the world more differently. Where realists see a pessimistic, constant struggle for power, liberals are way more optimistic. They see a world where cooperation is not only possible, but likely. They believe that things like international law, global trade, and democracy can actually overcome that brutal realist logic of anarchy. And to be clear, realism has a ton of critics. They argue that it's just way too pessimistic and that it misses huge parts of the modern world. Can it really explain the power of ideas? What about global trade or international cooperation? And the big one, how can a theory that's all about endless conflict explain moments of massive peaceful change, like the end of the Cold War? And all of this brings us to the final big question. Understanding realism is absolutely crucial, not because you have to buy into it, but because its logic has guided leaders for centuries, and it continues to shape our world today. So the ultimate question for us is this. Is this relentless focus on power an unbreakable law of politics? Or is it a dangerous story we tell ourselves, a self-fulfilling prophecy that actually creates the very world it claims to describe?